So Melachim Alef Perek Chet. This is really chapter 8, part 6 at this point, and we're focusing now on I would call it the denouement of chapter 8, and as we've talked about many times, the distinction between chapters by the numbers is bunk. It means nothing to us as Jews, really nothing. It was imposed on us from without, essentially. What we care about, though, is the paragraphing, the parshiot, as we have in our Masoretic text of the Tanakh, where the paragraphing breaks off between one section and the next. And therefore, to put artificial distinctions between, well, chapter 8 goes with 8 and 9 goes with 9, not always helpful. And I'll just show you today, we're going to learn a portion from chapter 8, the conclusion of the scene, if you will, at Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, where the inauguration of the Beit Mikdash takes place at the time of its dedication. We learned extensively over several weeks now the various parts of the tefillah. I would call it a programmatic tefillah, an aspirational tefillah. All tefillah is aspirational at a certain level, but it's aspirational it's the vision of what should happen in the Makom HaMikdash that Shlomo HaMelech is teaching the people as he unpacks the words of the tefillah itself, meaning both from a theological perspective, we talked about what does it mean that Hashem has a set place where he wants us to meet him as opposed to meeting him anywhere, since we maintain as a matter of faith Hashem is everywhere. So why is there a building, a structure? And of course, that's very much in the air right now around the world this very week. The Parashat Truma, we saw a few weeks ago, that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu is wondering about in the Medrash, describes him wondering to God, how could you want this? And that he sees through Ruach HaKodesh, Shlomo HaMelech himself asking this question, even the heavens and the highest heavens don't contain you, Hashem. So you want us to build you a little building? And Moshe is even in a greater state of consternation because it's not just a building that has a permanence and it's in the location of Har HaBayit, Har HaMoriah, Har Tzion. Instead, it's temporary itself. It's transient and it's going to be dismantled and rebuilt many, many times over its history. So there was a theological component. There was a national component. The idea that everyone gathers in one place. The explication of the uses of the Mikdash, the Makom HaMikdash, as the rallying point for tefillah, and tefillah for various reasons. One is tefillah related to justice. Another one is tefillah related to lo aleinu, seemingly natural occurrences, not really natural, but seemingly natural. Drought, which we know from the Torah is in Eretz Yisrael, certainly not merely a natural occurrence, but is always and forever a barometer of how the Jewish people are doing. The idea of, God forbid, plague or other natural, seemingly natural issues that might harm people. Also, of course, war, invasion, or military campaigns of other sorts. Yerushalayim will remain the center to which and from which people will direct their tefillot in that direction, and from which, if you will, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. She does not say himself, but seems to be implied, I think, from the tefillah as well. Having been 1 week ago, less than a week ago, in Eretz Yisrael, Midnat Yisrael, I can tell you that if the barometer is rainfall, we're doing really well. Beautiful Gishmei Bracha, a lot of Gishmei Bracha, 8 inches of snow in the Gush. Yerushalayim was even closed down last Wednesday night and Thursday. So that's the reality of the time in which we live. Thank God. I hope it's a good sign of good things to come. As we open up now, chapter 8, verse 54, that's Perek Chet, Pasuk Nun Daled. You can find that in the Koren Tanakh, page 416. We come to the end of the tefillah. He's finished the prayer. The prayer stretched over pages. We stretched over many weeks, learning the study of the intricacies of these psukim. Can't see everything. One of the main themes we came back to again, or not we did, but it's in the words of Shlomo HaMelech, V'ata tishma shamayim. You'll hear in Shamayim. You'll hear our prayer. You hear our prayer, and each of the paragraphs, each of the almost stanzas of the tefillah, are about Shlomo HaMelech explicating each time when we daven to you. You're not, imprisoned, stuck, contained in that sense in the Makom HaMikdash, but rather it is Mina Shamayim, which again is not really a vector of spatial designation, as much as it is understanding that which is out beyond our reach, we talk about as being Bashamayim, but really it refers to a different dimension. Yeah. We talked about the Malbim. We saw the Malbim's analogy of the king who has a home, and that he has also a country palace where people come to visit him. And the idea that in that mix, we have a notion of either HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, so to speak, is in the Makom HaMikdash, or his name is in the Makom HaMikdash, and he's still, so to speak, more distant, but he's still looking back at it, still focused on it as such, and therefore it becomes a place not only to reach out to Hashem, but a place for reprieve, for atonement. Granted, people have to be worthy of it, but that prayer is going to be part of that process as well. I was going to start the psukim, but I already see Shelly's hand. Let me take your question, Shelly, and then we're going to go right into the psukim on Lam Nun Daled. It's page 460 in the Korentanah. Shelly, please go ahead.
I don't know why it just hit me, but this is the idea of the king leading in prayer, which is what happened in all the pagan countries where the king is a pharaoh or whatever, is the head of the religion too, and all the power are there. Rabbi Sachs, of blessed memory, is always talking about how revolutionary we are because there's almost a separation of the different powers. And the idea that you've got the Kohanim that are in charge of the religion,
yep,
and the king just is almost a constitutional monarch. He's constricted by the Torah, and he does not do the religion thing, so all the power is not in one place. Now, we're seeing where it's the beginning of where everything goes wrong. I hate to always go back to this, but is Shlomo taking too much power for himself by doing all of this instead of having a Kohen or a Navi?
Okay, so yeah, I know that Rabbi Sachs is Zichron Livracha mentioned this many times. It's a true statement. It's correct. We didn't believe that the monarchs were beyond the law, and as evinced by what happens to Shaul, what happens to David, what's going to happen, what is happening to Shlomo. But that doesn't mean, I don't think Rabbi Sachs means that it precludes the religious fervor, the religious connection of the king. And here it's crucial to understand that the Makom HaMikdash is not just going to be the provenance of priests, it's actually going to be for the people. And the idea that the king himself shows his own dependency upon Hashem, not that he owns, manipulates, or controls levers of a machine, but that he is beholden to HaKadosh Baruch Hu no less than anybody else, I think is actually a great signal. But that's what we're going to see now today, just to, that's where we're going, is that after he finishes davening, he doesn't know that his tefillah will be accepted. So he davens that his tefillah should be accepted. In other words, he gives a bracha to the people, but the bracha to the people amounts to a number of brachot. Among them, I hope the prayer that I offered just now will find favor in God's eyes. That's the end of chapter 8. And chapter 9, so Hashem responds to him and tells him, here's what I think of your tefillah. So in other words, and that's all part of the Navi, right? It's not like some esoteric things, nobody knew what happened. It's published, if you will. We're meant to know that the king is one who is a mitpalel, and he's a mitpalel because he also feels and recognizes a great sense of dependency. Now, that's not carte blanche to decide, therefore, that he can get away with things. We're going to see, as you're right, that things do go off the rails, unfortunately. So is the way of the world. But we see, you have Shaul, you have David, you have Shlomo. But the prayerful dimension, this, he did not say, by the way, I arrogate to myself to be the priest. That would have been a contravention of the Constitution. He couldn't do that. The Torah says he can't do that, can't do it. But he can show the people that he cares about God. So for instance, let's just go right into it. Verse 54. Just read with me. Look, Vayi kechalot Shlomo litpalel el Hashem, eit kol atfilah v'atchina hazot, kam milifnei mizbach Hashem mikra al birkav v'chapav prusot hashamayim. The Navi goes out of its way to tell us that when he's offering this tefillah, he's on his knees. Flip back to verse 22. When he was reciting this tefillah at the beginning. There, verse 22 was Vayamod Shlomo lifnei mizbach Hashem neged kol ka'israel vayifros kapav hashamayim. Shlomo stood before the altar of Hashem, facing the whole assembly of Israel, and he raised up his hands heavenward. Then we have the prayer. If you read through the prayer, all of these verses, there's not any mention of him being on his knees. I have an image in my mind, which I don't want to say too explicitly, but I'll at least hint to it for those who know, of a certain Western European leader, Lahavdal Alfa Fe'avdalot, who wanted to very strongly demonstrate the contrition of his nation once. So he got down on his knees in public to try to make penance. Didn't work in my view. But the point is, here this wasn't to make penance. This was really the king's on his knees. There was an element here of appreciating. I'm davening. Now it's not our minhag anymore. We do not, halachically speaking, we're not meant to daven on our knees. But it is important to recognize the king was doing exactly that, and we find out that really he was on his knees the whole time. But we only find out at the end, like, oh, this whole thing was actually in a very whatever the word is, a state of being submissive to Kadosh Baruch Hu, whatever Hashem wants, right? I think it's a very strong symbol. A lot of the people they came from far away. So what do they see when they come? They see that the king himself is engaged in tefillah, and he's doing so with an element of humility. I think. So let's see a little bit farther in the in the words here. Pasuk nun hey. Vayamod. Then he stood up. Vayivarach et kol kahal Yisrael. Kol gadol lemor. He stood up and he blessed the whole nation, the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice. This was the proclamation at the end. Baruch Hashem, asher natan menucha la'ama Yisrael. He got these words directly, it seems, out of the Zemer Kol Makadei Shvi. Okay, that was anachronistic, but you understand. But that's where the words are from. When you sing Kol Makadei Shvi, one of the oldest Zmirot that we have, written by one of the Bali Tosfot. We don't know so much about him as far as I know. I believe his name is Moshe. It's very old, like 12th century or something, maybe 11th, maybe 13th. It's excerpted right here. Baruch Hashem asher natan menucha la'am Yisrael. Kecho asher diber lo nafal davar echad mikol dvaro atov asher diber biyad Moshe avdo. So blessed is God who gave rest to his nation as he said he would. They couldn't build a mikdash, have a national project to build such a place until there was peace. We saw that in chapter 12, Sefer Dvarim. It said Vishavtem Beta. It has to be a Pax Judaica. I don't mean in terms of world domination or something. I mean, just that the enemies are not attacking them at that time. Then they could build. So he did it. And nothing fell from what Hashem had said, which he had already spoken to Moshe, reminding the people, not the first time in this gathering alone, it's all connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe is referred to as Moshe Avdo. We call Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, when did that switch happen? Separate drasha, maybe Zion, others coming. I have to talk about it a little more in depth. But Moshe Avdo, there's an implication, I think, here, just on the level of pshat, there's an implication. Shlomo HaMelech understands the highest superlative for Moshe is Moshe Eved Hashem. That's the Torah describes him at the end. Say Parshat V'zot Bracha, and that's what happens here. And now comes the bracha for the people. Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, kasher haya im avotenu, al yazveinu v'al yitshenu. Also pasuk many of us know very well. Right. So may Hashem our God be with us as he was with our forebears. The sense of continuity from Moshe Rabbeinu. Continuity from our forefathers. May God not abandon us and not forsake us. La tutlav avenu elav, to cause our hearts to be turned or inclined toward him. L'lechet b'chol derachav, to walk in all of his ways. L'shmor mitzvotav, to guard his mitzvot, his commandments. V'chukav u'mishpatav, his edicts, his statutes. Asher tziva Hashem, asher tziva et avotenu, which he already commanded our forebears. Again, the idea that we're not living in our moment alone. We're living as a continuity to the generations past. And here we find the part which I would refer to as the prayer for the blessing for the acceptance of prayer. We have such a blessing that we say every single day, in the Amida, right? Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu ba'amcha Yisrael uvitfilatam. Find favor, God, in the prayers that we just recited right before. Yeah. And also you could say, people do also argue, and there's a discussion why there's two brachas next to each other. The bracha Shema Koleinu. It's also hear our voice. I just been talking to you for a while, but now we say hear our voice, like a catch-all, but it's also acceptance. Shema Koleinu. So that's verse 59. V'yud varei eila asher itchananti lifnei Hashem krovim el Hashem Elokeinu yomam v'layla lasot mishpat avdo mishpat amo Yisrael dvayom biyomo. The idea here that I have here a petition, tchina, a petition that I made before God. May they be close to Hashem day and night, meaning at all times, so that there will be the mishpat avdo, mishpat amo Yisrael dvayom biyomo means we should be deserving of a Kadosh Baruch Hu taking care of us, a Kadosh Baruch Hu supervising us, Hashgachat Hashem, etc. So all of this, being amplified as the closing remarks of Shlomo Melech before he sends the people on their way. Yeah, and to hope that the prayer that he just offered will be accepted by Hashem. Sorry, someone was trying to speak, or someone just left they're unmuted. Okay, I'll mute again. Just unmute yourself if you want to speak. I just didn't. It was confusing. Okay, so why? Pasuk Samach Leman Dad Kol Ami Haaretz Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Od. By your providence of us, right? The result should be so that all of the nations of the world, the Ami Haaretz doesn't mean the ignoramuses, it means all the peoples of the world should be able to know, lada, to know in the cognitive sense, but even more so in a visceral sense, to know in the biblical sense of knowledge, that Hashem, you are the only God, there's no other. A declaration of monotheism. Bound up with the declaration of monotheism for Shlomo Melech is the notion of Bichirat Yisrael and Hashgachat Hashem on Bnei Yisrael, the chosenness of Bnei Yisrael, and therefore the notion of divine providence impacting the Jewish people different than other peoples. That you see, right? Leman Dad Kol Ami Haaretz Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Od. And Samach Alef, Pas Samach Alef, he turns to the people. He tells them you have to do your part. Vayel Vavchem Shalem Im Hashem Elokeinu Lechet Bechukav V'Lishmor Mitzotav Kayom Hazeh. Right? Your hearts, he hopes, he prays, he blesses them. Your hearts should be also connected to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right? They should be whole with God. What would it mean to have a heart that's not whole with God? Unfortunately, very popular in the ancient Near East, very popular. Right? Syncretic worship. I believe God exists. I believe he created the world. I believe he's involved. But, there are other forces I have to deal with too, fertility cults, etc. So the idea, be shalem. Don't be figuring that you can have a little something on the side. No such thing. Further, the Malbim makes this point is when you see the way that Jewish history has unfolded to this point, the Shlomo Melech basically telling them, don't have doubt in your heart, asking is God with us or not. Yeah. In other words, recognize that God's providential supervision of our reality in Eretz Yisrael and as the nation that is now built a mikdash for Hashem is bound up with our behavior, and that Hashem's relationship to us will be commensurate with our relationship with Him, our dedication towards Hashem. Right. So I think there's a lot there. Let me pause here. Questions, comments, etc., and then I'll move on.
There's a very Moshiach kind of thing in this, that all the nations will know that there's God and stuff like that. And do any of the commentators go into how much he thought that that this was actually going to be the Messianic age, and this would be it, and there wasn't going to be a downfall?
I think that you don't need to make recourse to midrashim. I think that's the pshat. That's the pshat. I mentioned already a few sessions ago that I heard from one of the shiurim of Rav Yaakov Meidan, who, by the way, I was able to be Makir Tov to in person on Sunday. I saw him and I went over to him in the yeshiva and was Makir Tov to him. So that was nice. I told him we're all learning, among other things. We sometimes learn his Torah. So he points out that, in this in the main portion of the chapter, you have an expectation that maybe there'll be a war that will involve exile, but even so, the people can come back to this house, because the idea that God would destroy his house is inconceivable, absolutely inconceivable. And therefore there could be galut, but of course it's still going to be a Beit HaMikdash. So it's the same kind of thing here. Just in love of Pshat, not Rav Meidan, I'm saying it, but I think it's correct. Obvious we are on the upswing. Everything Hashem said is going to happen happened. We're here. We have peace. All we have to do now, very simply, is to bring the idea of God to the whole world. How can we do it? We're the platform. The Jewish people are the platform. In this prayer, he spoke already the words that later on would be spoken in other language, but the same sentiment. But that's the one that got into the Machzor. That's the one we all know by heart. Ki beiti beit tefillah yikarei l'chol ha'amim. This can be a house of prayer for all nations. Shlomo Melech says that right here in this original version. It's not Yeshaya centuries later, right? Shlomo's saying this is for all people. Says so. The idea now is, and that is very much messianic, for sure it is. By the way, is Shlomo Melech not in the technical term of the words? I know it's not really what they mean, but I mean, it is what they mean, but it's not what they mean. Is he not the Melech HaMashiach? He's an anointed king. He's an anointed king of the Davidic line. He's Ben David. Huh? He's Mashiach Ben David. It's not the Messianic era, but it could have been.
The name is.
Pardon?
His name is Shlomo.
And his name is, oh yeah, right.
It's right. Completely in peace.
Nachon. Exactly. 100%. But the idea that there's a real feeling of optimism, of hope. We've arrived finally at the zenith of Jewish history, right? Which was, we talked about this at the very beginning. It's Shirat Hayam, Mikdash Hashem Konenu Yadecha. I was talking about this with Rav Moshe Tarragon from Har Etzion, a little video that he asked me to be on Sunday. I'll send it out to the show a little bit. So it's this, that's it. So now we arrived. We built it. Done. What's next? We got to get the whole world on board. But again, the main condition is we're not doing it by the sword. We're not compelling anybody. They need to choose it. It's got to be a free will choice. Will they choose it? It was a little early, as it turns out, in Jewish history. We had to wait a little longer. We're still waiting, or we're still maybe the waiting is the wrong word, because that implies passivity. We still haven't done our part to make that happen. We're closer now than we were before. Okay, someone else wanted to speak? I'm sorry, Helen, is that you?
Yes.
Hi, good morning. Go ahead, no problem.
Good morning. It's sort of touching on Shelley's point. I like words. Hamolech mehodu kush. The word molech, melech, does not apply to any lofty godly connection. And we got Kohanim, we have Nevi'im. Sort of the reason that the Melech came up is because the Shoftim didn't work out that well about unifying and keeping the law across the land. So to find the king in such a lofty connection with Hashem, with the word Molech, I can't see a direct connection to that kind of a quality to the word Molech.
Well, if I understand you correctly, and I think that is the point, is that he's the king, and he's very spiritual. He's connected to Hashem, and he wants the people to be. And he's telling the people, be mindful of the fact that all of this that we've built is predicated on your awareness and your actions that accept that there's only one God and that you should have a relationship with them. I think that is what's going on. You're right. The word hamolech, kush is something. So that's dominion. It's not, but he's turning it a positive vein, isn't he? He's bringing the people in and he's telling them, we're gonna serve Hashem here.
But when we originate the concept, we already have Nevi'im, we already have Kohanim.
Right.
So when the king add on religious duties,
well,
more than
just political duties.
Religious duties, but about being the Kohen Gadol, let's say. He's talking to God, including us, so he becomes the main conduit rather than the Kohen Gadol, let's say. And when did this quality get imbued in him?
We got it from his
Not
father?
in him personally.
What about
world?
David?
All of them, into the word Melech. When did
Yeah, okay. Look, a Navi has the Dvar Hashem directly. A Kohen Gadol has the intricate instructions of what to do with in terms of Avodat Hashem in a Mikdash context. But the Melech has political abilities, economic abilities, military abilities. Will he turn them in the direction of bringing people closer to Hashem? And I think that's part of the righteousness of a Shlomo HaMelech. It wasn't always true, as Shelley has pointed out many times, and we're about to read over the next intervening weeks and months. It's very often not going to be true, right? But here we see an example of righteousness. Now, righteousness does not mean perfection, but there is something going on that's very, very positive. And it's not, the notion of having a king, remember, we've talked about this many times. It's actually in the Torah, in the 17th chapter of Devarim. It's not like they just came up with this idea, let's try this. It was in the Torah. Now, whether it was a mitzvah or was when you want it, or whether it was, at the people's initiative, when they were going to want it, or if they would want it, that's a big debate among all the Rishonim. But the fact that there's a provision for it and a mechanism for it, for sure. And remember that the king has to have a Sefer Torah on his arm, and he has to have one in his sort of in his bedroom. He's got to always be reviewing the Torah. It's to keep his humility in terms of his Yirat Shamayim, that there's a God above him. He's not above the law, and there are other restrictions that he has. And there's an implication that you can turn it in a positive vein. That's what Shlomo Melech was able to do. By the way, I would say David started to do it, although David had a certain cloud over him of challenge that unfortunately they kept him, what's the word? That prevented him from being able to really make as many inroads as Shlomo Melech was able to do. Although he then wrote Sefer Tehillim, which of course now is a sitter of Klal Yisrael. But in the time in which you live, we're going to see a Gemara now, shortly in Moed Katan, where again, that cloud was hanging over the legacy of David until the Makom HaMikdash was founded. Let me go to Larry, who's waiting, and give him an opportunity. Please, Larry. Hi, Larry. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's go on, please. I put my hand down. Let's go on. We've exhausted this topic. Let's move on.
Okay, fine. Let's go. So
could I just ask you one question about what Rav Meidan said? Is he saying that when they go into exile, that the Beit Hamikdash will still be standing?
He's just pointed out that's in the text, verse 46, 47, 48. It's right here. It's in the text. He was just pointing out, like, it's inconceivable to Shlomo Melech there won't be a Beit Hamikdash. It's inconceivable to all the kings. It's inconceivable to so many of the people, which is why in the days right before the Churban, when there is already many, many, many pages of Nevi'im saying it's going to be destroyed, the false prophets win every day the popularity contest by just saying, but it's a sanctuary of God. It's going to get destroyed. It's going to destroy his house. That doesn't make sense. If you believe, as I do, that God's most powerful God, so he's not going to let his house be destroyed by mere mortals. The Nevi'im, the actual Nevi'im, not the Nevi'ei Sheker, was saying, no, that's exactly what he's going to do. So that's in the Tefillah. Look with me, verse 62. We're back to, we learned these psukim already a little bit in depth. Hanukkah time, I sort of did the outside and then we did the inside of this parak. So that's why I'm kind of cycling through it. But we learn here again, now after all these tefillot, now we come to all these offerings. But remember, it's against the backdrop of the whole point of tefillah, which is verbal. Now we go back to the base of korbanot, which we talked about extensively, the relationship between the two of them. We're just not going to go back there today because I want to try to cover ground in the allotted time here. So we're at verse 62. the king and the whole nation, not just the nation, but the king and the nation who are with him, offer offerings before God. Vayizbach Shlomo Eitzavach Hashlamim, Shezavach LaHashem, Bakar Esrim Ushnaim Alef, that's 22,000 cattle, Vitzon Me'av Esrim Elef, 120,000 sheep. Vayachnichu et Beit Hashem, the Chanukah, we talked about a Chanukah time, Vayachnichu et Beit Hashem HaMelech, B'chol Beit B'nei Yisrael. They inaugurate the place. This is the Chanukah. What are they offering as offerings? Not the animals, but the type of offering, Shlamim. Shlamim means part goes on the Mizbeach and part the people eat. It is called not an Ola, which is a burnt offering. Everything goes up, proverbially. But here, Shlamim, Shlemut, wholeness, fits right in with the idea, conceptually, that they're making, they don't call it here a covenant, but it's affirming that we're in it with God, so to speak. The Mizbeach, he eats, if you will, and we eat. Also, the notion of Shlemut that just came up, Pasuk Samach Al, verse 61, comes back again. Bayomahu, Kidash Hamelach El et Toche Chatzer Asher Lifnei Beit Hashem Ki Asa Sham et Haulav et Amincha ve'et Chelvei Hashlamim Ki Mizbach HaNechoshes Shenifnei Hashem Katon Me'achil et Haola ve'et Amincha ve'et Chelvei Hashlamim. All different kinds of offerings couldn't fit on the one Mizbeach in the Makom HaMikdash. They extended it outward. I talked about that also. Chanukah, Ayin Sham. We're not going back there again. We talked extensively about expanding Kedusha, Malim Bakodesh, about expansiveness in that regard, and how it was necessary at the time of the Chanukah of the Mikdash. Verse 65, Vayash Shlomo ba'etahi et hachag. He made the festival. V'chol Yisrael imo kahal gadol milavo chamat and nachal mitzrayim, from all the way in the north to all the way in the south. He made a festival for the whole nation. They're all together, a great assembly. Lifnei Hashem Elokeinu shivat yamim v'shivat yamim arba asar yom. It's a 14-day festival. And then we learn by Yom HaShmini, Shilach et ha'am v'yavarechu et ha'melech v'yelchu lo oleihem smeichim v'tovei leiv al kol ha'tova asher asa Hashem David avdo u'Yisrael amo. So, not accidentally, as I talked about maybe 2 sessions ago, we read this portion of Vayhi Kechalot Shlomo, this section of the end of the parak, right, on Sukkot, or more precisely, on Shmini Atzeret. It's when the people go home. And we're learning about the blessing and the aspiration throughout each of the days of Sukkot. When we finished Hoshanot, we quoted these psukim, verse 59 and verse 60 from this section, is in Hoshanot, every day of Sukkot. The assembly of the people, it's the holiday of Sukkot. And therefore, the 66, Bayom Hashmini, means on the day that's the 8th day, the day after the 7th day. He sent them home. They blessed them. They went home at that point. It means after the 7-day festival was over, at the conclusion of it, and that's the end of it. There's a problem though, a fly in the ointment. It has to do with time, because we learned at the beginning of chapter 8 that he gathered the people specifically, and this is what we read at the beginning of Sukkot. We learned that he did gather them on Sukkot, page 413 of the Koren Tanakh, chapter 8, verse 2. That's the beginning of Haftorah on the first days of Sukkot, the second day. Vayikahalu el hamelach Shlomo kol ish Yisrael b'yerach ha'itanim. That's Tishrei. Bechag on Sukkot hu hachodesh hashvi. That's the 7th month. And then it tells you everybody came. At the end, tells you it's still the 7th month. He sent everybody home. Now, just to recognize, Bayom Hashmini, on the 8th day he sent them home, you could have very easily concluded Bayom Hashmini means on Shmini Atzeret. But of course, that will be problematic for several different reasons, such as, how are they leaving on Shmini Atzeret, not to travel on Shmini Atzeret, right? However, the Mitzudat David and the Malbim both, they say that on Shmini Atzeret, he told them they don't have to stay with him anymore. They can leave. They can go home. And therefore, it ended Shmini Atzeret. And therefore, Shmini, that's actually the way Chazal learn it. Shmini Atzeret is its own holiday. So they blessed the king. It got its own bracha. It was related to its own bracha. It's a Gemara in Sukkah on this. I don't want to belabor the point now because I'm trying to get to the beginning of chapter 9 before we conclude the shir. So that's one way of reading it, obviously, and that's we learn halachas from it. So let's say it's authoritative, but there's a problem, of course, because it describes in the verse before. It says they were gathered already at the beginning of the holiday of Sukkot. That's in verse 2. Then here it says that there's a 14-day festival. Verse 65. At that time, they made the festival, meaning Sukkot. All the Jewish nation was together with him, a great assembly from the far north to the far south, before God, 7 days and 7 days. It's 14 days. How long Sukkot? It's only 7 days. Plus an extra day, the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret. It's a 7-day festival and a 7-day festival. You could try to make a reading, make a lanin, and claim that what it means is that they got together on Sukkot. They had Sukkot 7 days, and there's another 7-day festival he added on. He extended it. It's possible. And that would solve the problem by Yom HaShmini, just on the level of pshat. This is not the way Chazal understood it themselves, because when you look in Chazal, the Gemara itself in, where is it, in Sukkah, refers to 6 ways that Shmini Atzeret is different than the prior days called Sukkot, even though it's called the 8th day of the festival. And the Gemara there makes the point that there are, it's called Pazar Kashab, it goes by 6 different things. The last one is Bracha. So they say Bracha b'fnei atzma. That's over here by Yom HaShmini. Shilach et ha'am v'yavarach. There's more brachas going back and forth, but there were brachas already in the 7 days and the 7 days. Why is there an extra bracha? Because it's a different holiday. It had its own bracha associated with it. If you go with the reading that on verse 2, Pasuk Bet, it's just telling you it was the time of. It wasn't literally on Sukkot, but that the whole month, verse 2. Vayikalu el hamelech Shlomo kol Yisrael biyarach eitanim b'chag v'chodesh hashvi. He gathered all of the people in the time of the month of the mighty, which is the 7th month, which is also called Tishrei, and Sukkot is in there as well. What about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Isn't it in there too? Sure, it's in there too. But Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur are not festivals. They're not regalim. So the focus is, why do you gather the people? Is there Hakel going on? Hakel, Vayikalu, because it's Sukkot. That's the holiday of gathering of crops, gathering of people. So they all got together in Yerushalayim. It doesn't have to be that it was literally the first day of Sukkot, even though we read it the first days of Sukkot. And then conversely, in the end, that's how you would figure out it's 14 days. Of course, there's going to be a big problem, which maybe Larry's about to signal or maybe not. About to find out. Go ahead, Larry, please.
It sounds like they had the Chagim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and then this elaborate dedication ceremony of the Beit HaMikdash afterwards.
Could be.
Which sounds backwards.
Well, let me say it the other way, which is the big problem. If they didn't do it that way, Sukkot is 7 days. And then the 8th day, that's what Chazal say, the 8th day somehow is Shmini Atzeret. There's an extra bracha, and they didn't actually leave that day. They left the next morning when it was not Yom Tov anymore, at night when it wasn't Yom Tov anymore. But if you move backwards 14 days from the end of Sukkot, from Shmini Atzeret, which is basically day 22 of Tishrei, if you subtract 14 days, what day is it? It's like the 7th or something. It's before Yom Kippur,
right? Which
raises a pretty big question, like Yom Kippur wasn't observed. And this is actually not my question. This is actually the question that appears, wouldn't you know, actually in the Gemara Masechet Moed Katan. The Gemara is baffled. How is it possible that they skipped the holiday of Sukkot, of Yom Kippur? It's like it's missing. So the Gemara in Moed Katan, for those who are learning the daf, we just saw it recently. If you're not, okay. There's a discussion about ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You're not allowed to intermingle 2 different simchas. It's a halachic category. There's a lot of twists and turns in it. Won't do everything, but how do we know you're not allowed to intermingle it? Dichtiv, because it says in the Sefer that we are learning, the verse we just read, verse 65. If it's possible that you could overlap one simcha and another, so if it's true that you're allowed to intermingle one and the other, right? That you could put them together. So maybe there was overlap. Maybe there was overlap between the two festivals, right? It sounds from here like we needed 7 days and 7 days. 7 days was Sukkot. 7 days was the festival regarding the temple. So in other words, the Gemara is reading like this: Shlomo at that time did Sukkot with the whole nation together in a big assembly from the north to the south before Hashem our God for 7 days, period. And then there was another 7 days, which was just for the Chanukah Hamikdash. That's 14 days. But if you say that you're allowed to intermingle days and days, right? In other words, that you're allowed to put them together, right? So we could have had it at the same time. So the Gemara relents and says, okay, wait a minute. V'dilma mintar lo natrinan v'hechad yitrame avdinan. Right? Maybe we could say that that what's going on. Wait, Larry, the question. I'm sorry, Larry.
Sorry, I'm confused because, well, the Gemara is dealing with if they observe both of them at the same time, which raises the question of Marvin Simcha. But that's one possible answer, but that doesn't answer the time issue of the 14 days.
Oh, we're getting there. The point is, though, that it didn't say it was a 7-day festival. It said it was specifically a festival and a festival.
But where that goes back to what I didn't understand before. Where did they celebrate the Chagim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot? And it would appear that the celebration occurred before the formal dedication of the Beit HaMikdash. Considering that these are the Yamim Noraim and the important, the most important part of the holiday cycle, it doesn't stand to reason that they would be observing him outside of the Beit HaMikdash that's just standing there. And they're at Bamot or somewhere else.
Right. So it sounds like they were actually observing Sukkot already in the Mikdash. That's what the Gemara is basically trying to say, is that maybe they celebrated for the 7 days before Sukkot, dedicating the Mikdash, and then the first Yom Tov, since they were all there, they had together, was Sukkot itself. And then the 8th day, was Shmini Atzeret, he gave them a bracha, right? And if it's really Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, then it should have actually been, Shlomo should have just delayed the dedication of the Beit HaMikdash until Sukkot itself. Do 7 for one and the other. L'mavet Shiva, l'hacha l'hacha. But he didn't do that.
Where do they observe Yom Kippur?
Oh, that's my question. That's not my question. It's really the Gemara's question. The Gemara is about to ask, wait a minute. They were eating and drinking on Yom Kippur?
Exactly.
It's a big jamboree, and they're violating the most important solemn day of the entire Jewish calendar that the Torah Kedosha in several places tells us is crucial.
And even
Right.
if they were not having, as you call it, a jamboree,
Yeah.
it doesn't stand to reason that the holiest day of the year would not be observed in the new Beit HaMikdash.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. You're reasoning the reasoning of the Gemara. It's coming.
I'm glad
The Gemara says, wait a minute, over here, the highlighted portion. Maybe why Shlomo didn't combine it, the two of them, he didn't just put them together, right? Is that once he had already finished, right? He figured, okay, I'm not going to combine it because I finished the Mikdash. The people are here. Let me do 7 days. And then I'm going to do the 7 days of Sukkot because they're all here. But I'm not going to delay it. They're all here already. They came for the inauguration. I don't delay the 7 days. So I did 7 days. And then I do Sukkot. But the Gemara says, maybe in general, if two simchas come out at the same time, maybe we do put them together. See, Baile Lishiure Purta. So Shlomo could have just figured out a way to leave a little bit of the building over. They didn't finish. and he would have finished on Sukkot and made it all at the same time. He didn't. He did this. He finished 7 days celebration, 7 days of Sukkot, and then the 8th day Shmini Atzeret. So the Gemara says, no, Shiur Bin Hamikdash Lo Mishayrinan. We don't leave things over. If you're building Beit Hamikdash, you have to finish it. There's, everyone would realize that it was something Mefarshim point out. People would realize that it's a ruse. They'd be, well, come on, we came all this way. Let's get rolling. We came for the holiday period of Yerach HaEitanim, Chodesh Tishrei. We want to have the party, right? So he said, well, Ibayli Shiuri Ba'ama Kalya Orev. What could he have left? What portion could he have left? There's that little part on the top of the Beit HaMikdash that was basically to prevent birds from showing up on the roof. He could have left over that. It wasn't essential to the building, and so he could have left it. The Gemara says, no, that doesn't work. Ama Kalya Orev Tzorach Binyan Abayidhu. No, it was also part of the building. He couldn't leave over part of the building. He couldn't argue that the part of the top was really just a something superfluous, and therefore he could just add that at the end, and therefore delay. I mean, the point is that people are there. Like, let's get the show on the road is the expression. Ella mida miyater kra michti ktiv arba asar yom shivat yamim lamali shmamina hani lechud v'hani lechud. Just to recognize that the fact is that the pasuk includes the number 14, and it says 7 and 7. So that teaches us that actually the 7 days of the Chanukat HaMikdash stand alone, and then there's a 7-day festival of Sukkot on its own. Now we come to this incredible, strange, bizarre problem, which is that by this logic, what happened to Yom Kippur? And that's the next part of the Gemara, a shocking Gemara, which you will also be perhaps shocked to learn if we were learning together in 2010. I think we came across 2011. We came across this Gemara already, but who remembers from such a long time ago? So Amar Rabbi Parnach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Otashana lo asu Yisrael Yom et Yom Kippurim. The Jewish people that year did not do Yom Kippur. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. Vayu dogim va'omrim. They were worried, and they were saying, Shema nitchayvu sanem shel Yisrael kilaya. Maybe the enemies of the Jewish people now have been obligated to be destroyed. That's a euphemism. Lashon saginor. Yatzta batko va'amr lahem kulchem bezumanim l'chayil haba. And they heard a heavenly voice that told them, no, you're all invited to a life in the next world, i.e., not that you're going there now, but don't worry, when the time comes, you get to go to Olam Haba. You're not going to be, you have your chelik still. You didn't lose it. How do we learn this? How do we see it, that it's somehow something that they reasoned was going to be okay? That's a bit strange because it says Yatzabak, which implies there's like a heavenly voice. They all have some kind of divine inspiration. But then my darush means, how did they understand that what they were doing was okay, just based on their understanding of Torah? My darush, amru kal vachomer. They used an a fortiori argument. Uma mishkan she'en kedushato kedushat olam b'korban yachid Shabbat. This is skila. So if, when it comes to a korban yachid, let me say it again. If the Mishkan, which does not have everlasting kedusha, remember, because it was only meant to be a temporary dwelling in the first place, right? So if we have the korbanot of individuals, which individuals gave korbanot on Shabbat specifically, right? Generally, the individuals don't give korbanot, except at the inauguration of the Mishkan, where there were 12 days of korbanot straight. So the 12 days of korbanot, one of those days is going to be Shabbos. Yet the tribal leaders were allowed to do it, the Nisi'im. So the korban yachid was Doches Shabbat, which is actually an Isser Skila. So Mikdash, the Mikdash, Dikdushato Kedushat Olam. This is everlasting Kedusha. And a korban Sibur means the korbanot of the service of Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim to Anus Karet. Yom Kippur is not as severe as Shabbat. I mean, it's in quotation marks, but the punishment is karet and not skila. Skila is considered harsher and worse because You can't fix it after, but karet you can do tshuva from, presumably. So lokol shekain, all the more so, we should be allowed to override Yom Kippur. Now they didn't decide this on their own, right? It was being decided for them by Shlomo HaMelech as a hora'at sha'ah. But if we go with the logic, again, this is how the Gemara functions, right? That we're trying to understand about Ema Avim Simcha B'Simcha. We recognize that two of these were not overlapping. Sukkot was its own thing, and the Hakdasha was another, the Chanukat HaMikdash. Therefore, the Chanukat HaMikdash presents now a problem. It's overlapping Yom Kippurim. According to this opinion, again, it's an opinion. You don't have to say this is like the Ikar Amuna, where Rabbi Parnach says, and Rabbi Yochanan, that year they didn't do Yom Kippur. There's no Yom Kippur that year. So Ella Amayu Dogim. So wait, if they had this logic, then why were they nervous? And why were they waiting for a bat kol to reassure them? Don't worry, Kulchem Muzuman L'Chaylam Abba. So why are they worried? Hatam over there in the story with the Nesiim bringing their korbanot. That whole thing was Tzorach Gavoa, right? They were giving these korbanot that were going to be korbanot that were given to Hashem. It was for the sake of God that they gave it. What's going on over here? Hacha, in a case of Shlomo HaMelech's inauguration of the Mikdash, Tzorach Hedyot. They're getting something out of it. What's that? Yeah, they're eating. So wait. Hachanami, the Gemara says, mi'aved li'avdu, meichel lo neichelu, v'lo lishtu. Okay, maybe actually for the Mikdash, maybe they did have simcha, but they didn't eat, they didn't drink. They just experienced it. It's still a little bit of a question, obviously, like, okay, but they didn't do the Yom Kippur service. There was no Kohen Gadol. Like, so the Gemara answers, ain't simcha b'lo achil v'shtiya. No, they were definitely eating at that exact time. So they definitely ate on that Yom Kippur, and they didn't have an actual Yom Kippur. And it's it's quite something. I have a lot to say about this Gemara, but I have to get to the next piece of the Gemara also to show you that, because it's related and germane to what we're talking about. But look at what happens here. The Mishkan has a halacha psuka. You're not allowed to build it on Shabbat. That's Parshat Vayakel. That the notion of Kedushat Zman will override the desire to build a place that it will have Kedushat Makom. You can give korbanot in the Mikdash on Shabbat, or the Mishkan and the Mikdash, when they are related to korbanot Tzibur. The korbanot, however, the Nesiim, while they represented each of the tribes, are not the Tzibur of Klal Yisrael, but they are individual Nesiim giving them, and therefore they're considered korbanot Yachid. Those were allowed to supersede Shabbat. The people reasoned, if that's true for Shabbat, which is an Isser Skila, and it was a korban Yachid, so the korbanot of Yom Kippur, which are korbanot Tzibur, they impact the whole V'chiper ba'ado uve'ad beito uve'ad kol kahal adat Yisrael, etc. Right? So all of that is a korban tzibur that can be pushed off. So then, okay, why are you worried? Because we're actually enjoying this. We're actually eating and drinking. So I have to think about that. In the Mikdash's inauguration, on a certain level, not with regard to Shabbat, but with regard, ironically, to Shabbat Shabbaton, a time period of Kedusha, what happened? The concept of Kedushat Makom seems to have superseded Kedushat Zman. At least here, temporarily. Yeah? In as much as they set aside Yom Kippur. So you'll ask me, well, didn't they need atonement? Did they just get out of it? You got like a get out of jail free card? So the Gemara has a little sidebar over here and says, Mishkan dedachi Shabbat minal. And how do you know the Mishkan is doches Shabbat? When they gave the korbanot. How do you know that for day 1 and day 7 refer to days of the week? Maybe it just means the 7 days of korbanot. It was 7 days whenever they started. Yeah, but as the Gemara points out, okay, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Kra B'yom Ashtei Asar Yom. Right? It also mentions afterwards the expression is B'yom Ashtei Asar Yom means on the 11th day of the day. What does that mean? So Ma Yom Kulo Ratzuf Af Ashtei Asar Kulan Ratzufim. Just as the 11th day is clearly one day, it teaches us that all of the days that came before are also one unit. They're consecutive without breaks. Because you could have argued, in other words, hypothetically, there was day 1 of the korbanot, day 2 of the korbanot, day 3 of the korbanot, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. Even if it was day 1 was Sunday, day 2, day 6 was Friday, but day 7 maybe was not Shabbat. Maybe day 7 was Sunday of the next week. Maybe they didn't do it on Shabbat. And the days just mean the days when korbanot could be given were given. No, says the Gemara, the fact that it says b'yom hashtei asar yom teaches that that day was a yom ratzuf, a day that was consecutive, wasn't broken up. So too, all the days are not broken up. So the Gemara says, yeah, okay, again, but v'dilma yom haruyin. Maybe you still want to argue that, okay, that's true, but it's only days that are actually possible to do it. If it wasn't possible, maybe Shabbos will supersede. No, Ketiv Kra Achrina, the next day, day 12 says b'yom shnei masar yom. Now, by the by, this is not pshat what the Gemara is doing now, right? It's medrash, but that's a layer of understanding that we have as part of our Masorah, how to understand these psukim. Why did it step out from saying bayom harishon, bayom hashlishi, bayom hachamishi? Now it says biyom ashtei asar yom, biyom shnei masar yom. Now the pshat answer could very easily be, that's the syntax of how it goes when you get to 11, 12, 13, 14. That's how it writes it in the Torah. That's why the 2 days are like that. The Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says, no, the fact that it's 11 looks like it does, biyom ashtei asar should have been enough, but it added the word yom seemingly superfluously, means we're meant to darshan the word yom. And now that it did it for 12, tells us something else. Ma yom kulo ratzuf af shnei asar yom kulan ratzufin. B'dilma hachanami yom ha're'uyin. Maybe it also just means only on the appropriate days when you can offer offerings that you do. The Gemara says, no, im kain trei karoi lamali. Why did it repeat it twice then? Why did it have for 11 and 12? We made the point already over here. You need days that are whole days. It said it on 11 and 12 to tell you, to drive home the point that it was without breaks, it superseded Shabbos. Umikdash, the Dochi Yom Kippur Minalan. How do you know Mikdash is going to be Dochi Yom Kippur? So, Ilema midichtiv arba asar yom. So here also the Gemara basically says, which I think is really, this is how it goes. The Gemara says, all right, you're right, you got me. You know, if how do you know that the Yom Kippur was overridden? Maybe also it was only on days that could be. So they had a 7-day festival, means they had 6 days or 5 days or 4 days. They broke for a day for Yom Kippur, then they went back, right? So if you want to say the fact that it says in these psukim in verse, 6, Samachay, Arba Asar Yom, maybe also it's Yamim, Vidilma Yamim HaRe'uyin. Maybe it's also only days that are appropriate, skip the day. Answers the Gemara, no, Gamar, Yom Yom Mehatam. You should learn it from the psukim regarding the Mishkan, where it had B'yom Hashtei Asar Yom, it had his Yom, and here we had also for in our case, Arba Asar Yom, right? So the answer is okay. You learn like a Gzera Shava basically between the two, between what it says in the Torah and what it says in the in Sefer Melachim. So now, Yatz the Bad Kol v'Amra Lahem, the divine, the heavenly voice came out and said to them, Kulchem Zman L'Chayim Abaya Avishyan, the world to come. Right? U'minalan da'achil lahu. How do they know they were forgiven? Meaning, how do they know they're forgiven for this? How do they know they're forgiven for their sins? The Tana Tachlifa, because Tachlifa Ta'ad, Bayom Hashmini, Shalach Am. Now at the everything we just read now at the end of that chapter. That's the last pasuk. Yeah. They went to their tents. Teaches us they went home and the men who were there came home. They found that their wives were pure. They had benefited from the divine presence. And their hearts were glad. Everyone had a son. They were very happy as a result. So al kol tova, on all of the goodness, that they were told, that was al kol tova. So each of these phrases, in other words, according to Tachlifa, is meant to teach another element of the the joy surrounding the leaving of Yerushalayim to go back home, right? Okay. Now, LeDavid Avdo Yisrael Amo Bishlam Yisrael Amo Dachil Avon Yom Kippurim. Okay, I got it. You mentioned the Jewish people; they were forgiven that the sin of skipping Yom Kippur, right? That worked out for them. But hold on, why are you mentioning David again? Oh, David Avdo Maihi. Why is that coming up again? So the Gemara here recounts the Gemara we already know very well. We've seen it already a few times. The gates slammed shut, or they wouldn't open. They were stuck. He said 24 types of songs, or supplications, etc. Didn't open. Then he said from chapter 24, still didn't work. When he invoked his father's name, then it opened. And don't forget the kindness of my father, of David, your servant. Then he was forgiven. It was answered. And at that time, the people understood that David Hamelech was forgiven for that sin, for that iniquity. In other words, this last pasuk in the chapter, according to the Gemara, bespeaks all the different elements of goodness and gladness that the Jewish people took as a result of their encounter in Yerushalayim with the Shechina, with the inauguration of the Beit HaMikdash, right? And the last word, LeDavid Avdo Yisrael, why invoking David yet again? Because one of the great takeaways and take-homes for the people was specifically that David HaMelech was forgiven, and it sort of cemented it. Now they took that home, means they told everyone when they got home that in point of fact, they had seen the vindication of the legacy of David HaMelech. We don't have time to see it too much in depth, but at least to see the end of the unit. Let's read a few psukim in closing today. Chapter 9, again, it's totally artificial. We have a pasuk that's by itself, which we'll have to get more in depth into next week. But Vayihi kechalot Shlomo livnot et Beit Hashem ve'et Beit HaMelech ve'et kol cheshek Shlomo shechafetz la'asot. And behold, when Shlomo concluded building the house of God and building his palace, we skipped a little parshiah about him building his palace, because I'm going to come back to it because it's germane for a little bit later. All of the good that God had, and all of the desire of Shlomo. So what does that mean, all of the desire of Shlomo? We're skipping it for now, but just we'll have to come back to it. It's a parshiah on its own. It's like a connecting, it's like interstitial tissue. It's connecting between the two sections. Asher Chafetz says everything he desired to do, he did. He had done. But now look at pasuk bet through tet. We'll close with this. As a result of his tefillah and his brachot, Vayira Hashem el Shlomo Sheinit kasher nira elav begivon. First Hashem had come to him in Givon. There was that Revelation chapter 2, chapter 3. Now, that's when he asked for wisdom, right? That's when he says he's going to build a big mikdash. Now Hashem came back to him. Now where? In Yerushalayim. Vayomer Shemei Lav. Shamati tfilatcha v'tchinatcha sheitchananta lefanai. Hikdashti et habayit hazeh asher banita lasum shemi sham ad olam. V'hayu einai v'libi sham kol hayamim. I accepted your tefillah. I heard what you said. I heard your supplication, that which you petitioned me. I have sanctified, consecrated this building that you built to place my name therein forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all days. The ata and you, im, that's the operative word. You could like circle it like in red or blue or green or whatever. Im telech lefanai. It's a conditional statement. And as for you, im telech lefanai kasher alach David avicha betam levav uviyosher lasot kechosh tiviticha chukai u'mishpatai tishmor. If you will follow everything like your father David did. David, who was not perfect, but who was the greatest Baal Tshuva of Jewish history, right? But he was, now God's still testifying about him with a complete heart and with in an upright manner to do everything that I commanded him, my edicts and my statutes, right? Once again, greatness and perfection are not the same thing. You see it as evinced right here, describing David Malcolm Mashiach, the great Baal Tshuva. What will I do, says Hashem? Al Yisrael le'olam. I will make your throne the throne for the Jewish people forever. Forever. Now, in some sense, that is still true. We're looking for Mashiach ben David. So it's someone from the Davidic line. It's also from the Solomonic line, if you will, to say it that way, right? From Shlomo. On another level, things didn't play out that way. As I spoke to David, your father, saying, I will not cut off your people from being on the throne of Israel. If you will turn away, basically, you'll return, but means withdraw you and your sons from me, from being behind me, from if you go and worship other gods, bow to them. So what will I do, says Hashem to Shlomo? I'll cut off the Jewish people from this land, which I have given to them. And what else does he tell Shlomo, which Shlomo was no doubt hearing as a crushing revelation? It's right here. Hashem tells Shlomo, if you don't behave, not only will I cause exile, but the house also is going to come down. I'll get rid of it. And the Jewish people will be the talk of the town. They'll be the talk of the world, right? Everyone will not understand it. And therefore, verse 8, elyon, kol over alav yisom v'sharak. They're gonna come. This house, which should be may it be exalted, may be very high, but what will happen to it? Everyone who passes by it will be shaking their head and whistling. They can't understand it. This is unbelievable. We're shocked, right? Shmama and lishruk. So v'amru al me'asashem kachal haaretz. Why did God do this? Now, these words that Hashem is speaking to Shlomo Melech are actually reminiscent of words that appear in Sefer Dvarim and Parshat Nitzavim, etc. Right? V'amru al asher zvuat Hashem Elohehem asher hotziu et avotam me'eretz Mitzrayim v'chziku be'elohim achirim v'yishtachavu lahem v'yavdum. Shem tells Shlomo, I accept your prayer, but I want to correct something that you said. I want you to sort of put you on notice. The correction is there can be exile and destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, but recognize that if that, it's conditional, right? And the third point is that the conditional, if you behave, if everybody does what they're supposed to do, you're keeping it. If not, out. And it will be a discussion among all the nations of the world. How could this have happened? How could it happen? And they'll understand it's because the Jewish people were undeserving of being there. They bowed to idols, etc. And we'll come back, of course, and see over the next prakim how things played out in the life of Shlomo. And then, of course, in the subsequent generations, many of us are already aware, but that'll have to come back next week. So looking forward to learning again next Thursday. Until then, wish everyone a great day. And bracha and tzlacha.